Andy, great to have you on. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Josh. Pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. Now, before we go into all that good stuff, I'd like to sort of have a bit more of an understanding and share sort of how did you enter this space? What's your journey? How did you end up working in the football industry? How did all this come about?
Well, I think mainly it's down to just passion for the game. It's something that I've had since, being on the terraces at the time. This is how old I am. On the terraces of Ewood Park before it was redeveloped into what everyone knows it as today. But my dad took me down when I was 5, and I remember vividly, the atmosphere, and that's always, that started it. And then I've just been playing and watching football ever since then. So it's always been close to me, but in terms of a professional position, that's not something that came along until fairly recently. Like I trained to be a teacher. I was a maths teacher for a few years. You mentioned about kind of data driven and data thinking, and obviously we'll go into that. But everything that revolves in my career around maths and sport. So I did like maths A level and further maths A level when I was a teenager. Yeah. But by the time I'd finished those, I was like, well, okay, that's enough maths for now. I'll go into sport. And I did a sports and exercise development degree. And then I went out and traveled and did all that good stuff. And then I was like, let's go back to maths and do a maths teaching degree. Then I taught for 4 years. And then I went into bookmaking. And I think we're seeing this a lot. And obviously you speak to a lot of people in the industry. I think there's a lot of people who go from that trading, almost like betting quant side into football, because a lot of it is along the same sort of lines. You're looking for value, right? So I was a tennis trader actually for William Hill, and then I was a football trader for Sky Bet. And then eventually, the work in football gathered more pace. I started out by putting things on social media, as a lot of people who are now in the game did. It was Twitter that was big at the time, and I was one of those people who was putting things out for free on Twitter. Got connected to a Blackburn Rovers fan group because I am a Blackburn fan, and then Market Insights asked me if I wanted to start doing projects with them, and so I still do that to this day. And then Greg Broughton, when he came into Blackburn Rovers, he asked me if I was interested in helping them out with their recruitment, and that turned into a consultancy which lasted almost 2 years. And then obviously it's football regimes and things behind the scenes change, and that was perfectly fine. It all ended amicably. And then since that point, I kind of gone back to this writing about the GBE stuff, which I was doing before the Blackburn Rovers contract, but obviously you can't really write publicly about this stuff when you're contracted to help a club. So when that ended, I thought, right, well, I'll start putting things back on social media, LinkedIn mainly this time, although Twitter was still going. And people liked it. People liked learning about the governing body endorsements and elite significant contribution, which again is worth talking about. And then at that point, I was like, well, okay, how can this become more of a formal thing? What can I do with this knowledge and information? And so I set up the GB Expert Hub. That's been going since December the 1st last year. So it's still a baby, really. And yeah, so that platform is educational, it's content, but there is a free subscription that people can use. But obviously the most value is in the paid subscription, which is it's only £5 a month, but basically you get 2 articles a week plus a podcast a week, all about basically this niche. And I recognise it is a niche, but as you said in your introduction, it's important. It's important for British clubs to get the recruitment right.
Apologies for taking you away from the podcast, but this will be really quick. We've launched our football business community. What that is everyone that's a guest on this podcast is part of this community. So if you would like to network with our guests, this is the place to do so. We have a live Q&A with every podcast guest on, so you can ask your questions rather than just listening to mine. If it's something that sounds interesting to you, there's a discount code in the description below. Use it, click the link, join the community. Right, that's all from me. Let's get back to the podcast.
No, absolutely. For those who are sort of unfamiliar, what are the sort of big changes that came about sort of post Brexit? How much different do sort of transfers operate now since Brexit has happened?
I think the biggest change is obviously the pool of players that you can recruit from. So let's take it back to pre-Brexit. Obviously, when we were part of the EU, there was freedom of movement, and that freedom of movement extended to football as well. It's an industry just like any other. So when you were recruiting people, if they had an EU passport, you knew that they would be able to come over and work. You didn't need to get them a work permit because it fell under that legislation, and that extended to 16, from 16 all the way up to whatever age. So that was the situation. And then when Brexit was voted through, and then eventually the deal was signed in 2020, the FA and the Home Office, or all the FAs, so in the English FA, and then we have to remember that obviously, although it's a UK government, and though the UK government is outside of the EU, all of the football constituent countries are all managed by their own FAs. So actually each FA has its own governing body endorsement regulation. Most of them are based on the same thing, if anyone ever looks at them, and it is accessible for free on the front page of the GB Expert Hub to look at each of the individual FA's documents. But yeah, so they had to basically work out what they were going to do in terms of who they allow in and who they don't. And as was in vogue at the time, it was like a points-based system. And so there's two ways of breaking it down. The easiest way is to get in is by getting an auto pass. So if you are recruiting a player who is an international footballer, especially for a top 50 nation, so a top 50 ranked FIFA nation, then you can get an auto pass if you play a certain percentage of minutes for that country over the last 12 months or 24 months, depending on your age. So that was the easiest way of doing it. And a lot of top Premier League clubs obviously will sign players that are internationals. If they're not, then there's a points system, and you need to get 15 points on the GBE system to be able to get the GBE. And what that basically that says, the FA says that this player is basically of the level to come and play professional football in this country. And so that endorsement, that governing body endorsement, goes to the Home Office, and then the Home Office process the work permit. So when anybody sees transfers going through and it says pending work permit or pending international clearance, as we often see on the posts or whatever, and that's what that means. Basically, they've got the endorsement, but they're just waiting on the work permit to be processed. And until the players get that work permit, they obviously can't train or play in this country. So it's important. Do you want me to go into how you get the 15 points?
Yeah, sure. I think the whole reason why I speak to experts in their fields is because they have this level of detail and they have this level of knowledge. A lot of people can sort of read a website and give you a generic overview of a regulation, but only very few people know the intricate details, especially off the top of the head, and being able to sort of elegantly speak about it in a way in which everyone can understand. So yeah, keep going.
Well, I hope that is the case. Sometimes I feel like I'm rambling on a little bit, so please do tell me if that becomes the case. Because, like you say, no, you absolutely can just read this and access this on the FA website. You can read the regulations. The problem is it's in, like, this better than most. It's in jargonese, so it is difficult for people to cut through all of that and all of the paragraphs and regulations. So that is that's the aim of what I'm trying to do, is to demystify it and make it easier for people to follow. So in terms of going back to these 15 GBE points, there's a few different criteria that the FA have put out in the regulations that basically you need to get 15 across those criteria to be able to get the regulations, to get the work permit. So the easiest way of thinking about it is basically where you are playing your football. That gets you the most of your points. So if you are pursuing, let's just say that your club is pursuing a player that is playing in one of the big five leagues, as we refer to them. So that is the Premier League, yes, but also La Liga in Spain, Ligue 1 in France, the Bundesliga in Germany, and then Serie A in Italy. So usually in the media, they're called the Big Five. What the FA refers to them as is Band 1. So they've banded all of the world's leagues up into these different bandings, and those 5 leagues are Band 1 leagues. So if you're playing in that league or you're registered to a club in that league and you've been at least on the bench for that team in that league, then you get 12 points. So obviously you only need 15 to get the pass. So you can see how playing in one of those leagues makes it, fairly straightforward to try and get a work permit. You still need the extra 3 points, and the way you can get those is through a variety of different, obviously, criteria. The most common of which is the number of minutes that you play. So it only starts really counting up from 30% of minutes. So again, if your club is pursuing a player that's played 30% or more minutes in one of those big 5 leagues, then they will get the work permit, because you can get up to 12 more points for the number of minutes that you play. So you could get, if you played 90% or more minutes in a Band 1 league, then that would give you 24 points, which is obviously far and above what you need. It gets more complicated as you go down the bandings, though. So that's your Band 1. Band 2 is also fairly straightforward. So this is like, if you think about it in quality terms, these are probably your next lower down European leagues, and that's generally the way that it goes. It's not prescriptive to rankings, or the FA don't run ranking systems on these countries. They don't actually explain how they've come up with these bandings, helpfully. But, I suppose they don't need to. It's just the regulations. But Band 2 is the Eredivisie in Holland, the Pro League in Belgium, the Primera Division in Portugal, and then Super League in Turkey. So that's your Band 2, 4 leagues again. And that gets you 10 points, 10 GBE points. And again, if you play 90% of minutes, domestic minutes in those leagues, then that will get you 20. The bottom cutoff in terms of domestic minutes for that is 40%. That gives you 5 GBE points. So again, if your club is pursuing a player that is playing in Turkey, let's say, and they've played 40% of available minutes, I should have said that. So if they've been injured for a portion of the season, that can be taken away. So it's not like unduly punishing players who might have just had a couple of injuries in the season and haven't quite hit the minutes that they should have done. So it's available minutes. And yeah, so those two kind of like bandings are fairly easy to shop in still. Yeah. So even though we're out of the EU and there's no freedom of movement, you could probably shop in those 8 European leagues fairly without worry. Especially if you're a Premier League club, because obviously you're recruiting players that are of a decent quality that you think are going to improve your squad at some stage, whether they're young or not. And most of those will have played that percentage of minutes for the clubs that they're playing for. It's then going into the other bandings, which makes it a little bit more tricky. So Band 3, which is a little bit more worldwide, it's Brazil's top flight, Argentina, Mexico, and now the MLS. Originally it was Russia. But there has been changes in between 2020 when this was originally done and what it is now. So Russia have been replaced by the MLS, which is a sensible move in my opinion. But if you want to buy a player directly from those leagues, you only get 8 points for league quality. This is coming down in this. So I've gone from 12 to 10 to 8 now. And so again, then you can probably do the maths yourself. If you're playing 90% of minutes, then that gets you another 8 points. So that's 16. So yes, you can get it, but you can see the cutoff here now for the percentage of minutes that you play is quite high, 80%. So that gets you the 15 that you need. So the question comes then, what happens if you don't play 80% of minutes in Band 3? Or if you only play 30% of minutes in Band 2? Well, there's other criteria, basically, that can come in at this stage if you don't meet the 15 from those 2 bits. If you are playing for a club that is qualified for a continental competition, i.e. the Champions League, Europa League, Conference League as well, but also, we talked about South America there, the Copa Libertadores or the Sudamericana, then you can, and also, because the MLS is in Band 3, we should probably also mention the Champions League in CONCACAF as well. Although I'll come to that in a second, because not to make it too complicated, but they have separate bandings as well. So the Champions League and the Copa Libertadores are a Band 1 continental competition. Right, so you get more points for playing in those competitions than you do in the Europa League, the Conference League, and the Sudamericana. And actually, any other competition outside of those 5, anywhere in the world, is classed as a Band 3 continental competition. So you actually only get points for those if you make it to the semi-finals or beyond. So it's actually quite stringent in terms of those other kind of competitions. but yeah, so you can get points for as far as your team progresses in that, you get points. So if you want to make it into the group stage of the Champions League, that's 4 points. But you don't necessarily have to have played in those matches. So it's just the club that you play for has to have played to that stage. But if you're a player that's playing in those continental competitions, then you get, again, percentage of minutes, you get more points. So there's those ones. You can also get points for playing internationally if you don't get your auto pass. If you've not played the percentage of minutes that you need for the auto pass, then you can get points that way. So yeah, there's a whole variety of ways that you can get points. There's points for league position as well. So if your club qualifies for a continental competition or wins the title or whatever, there's points available for that as well.
Well, I can understand why people hire a maths teacher to help them with all the math on this, as there's so many intricate different ways you can sort of rack up your points. There's 2 things that sort of sprung to mind. Is one, obviously, lower league teams. So I'm thinking, like, if I'm with a League Two side, and they're after a player, the players that they're after are going to be less likely to have hit the benchmarks. Well, they may more in the lower bands played more games in, say, like the Turkish league or whatever. But obviously, if you're a Premier League club signing a player or a League Two club signing a player, is there no difference in the amount of points in which that player has to be able to attain in order to meet their license? And then, because obviously there's a different quality of player you need to be in order to play in the different divisions. So that's sort of one question. And then the other question that comes to mind is, with all this, if I'm a young player, I think it's really important for players to also understand these regulations. Because if your ultimate goal is, I want to go and play in the Premier League, you then have to sort of map out now, what's the most likely, am I more likely to play more minutes in like a band 3, or should I try and get myself in a band 2 club, maybe not play as many minutes, but I still might be able to hit the threshold needed to get myself in the right band? I mean, obviously it's all about developing yourself as a player to get as good as you possibly can, and that's how you're going to get there. But in terms of, like, there is a game to be played here in terms of making sure that you're eligible, because if you go and play, there's no more advantage playing 100 minutes compared to 40 minutes. Percent in certain divisions, because either way you've already qualified, if that makes sense. So do you think there is certain clubs that have gained an advantage from this system, and some clubs that have sort of missed out because of how the math is sort of played out? Or
yeah, for sure. Like, I'll take the second part of it first, and then I'll circle back around to the first part of the question. Absolutely. Like, playing in England isn't the be all and end all, is it? Like, no. Obviously football's a worldwide game, and people will play in all different countries, and we should encourage that global ecosystem. But at the same time, I think, it's not big-headed to say that England is quite a prestigious country to play football in. The Premier League has obviously become this, worldwide almost event every time a match is played, and the biggest TV budgets are for England. Whenever you go, I mean, I don't know if you've traveled, but I have traveled, like, extensively, and you see Premier League shirts everywhere, and some of the conversations that you have, in fact some of the only conversations that you can have with locals around the world, is about football and is about the Premier League. So obviously people do want to play in that competition, and then by extension the Championship, League One, League Two, because it's almost seen as a conveyor belt to the Premier League. If you play well in the Championship, then it's obvious that you can probably do a job in the Premier League as well. So it absolutely is something that players, but almost more importantly, agents, need to be familiar with, and what that pathway looks like in terms of being able to get into England. And that brings us neatly onto the second part of your question in terms of that pathway and the different levels. Look, it's an immigration policy. So basically the FA don't want, and this is part of the Brexit thing that everyone voted, well, not everyone, but 52% of people voted for in the UK, is that we don't just want anybody coming in and taking the jobs of some English talented young players. Part of that is obviously the pathway to England. The national team, they don't want to block that for young players. They don't want to like prevent young talented English players from having a career in football. So you don't necessarily want to have different levels of this, so that League Two clubs can sign a load of foreign players, League One clubs can, because wherever the players that don't make it at the Premier League are going to then go and play. Like that's why we have this pyramid in place. So no, there's no difference in terms of the 15-point benchmark is the 15-point benchmark. And let's be real about this. Going back to pre-Brexit, League Two clubs weren't signing players from foreign markets then. Like I've tracked every transfer coming into the country since, like, over the last decade. And pre-Brexit, the percentage of domestic business was never below 97%. Right. So, and that's still the same now. In League Two, League One was always above 90%. Last season was the first time it dropped below 90%. And if we think about what happened in League One last season, or should I say the current season, technically still, because the playoff final is only a few days away. Birmingham City were obviously in that league. And there was other big budgets. Huddersfield spent a lot of money. Wrexham spent money. Stockport County, Charlton. Like, there's a lot of decent budgets in that league. And actually, the amount of money spent in that league in terms of transfer fees was over €50 million, which is 10 times the amount that it was the previous season. And a lot of that is Birmingham. A lot of that is Jay Stansfield on his own. But it is coming in League One. We are seeing a lot more transfers in League One, but that is mainly because, and the Championship is the same, mainly because of ESC, Elite Significant Contribution.
Bro, I think that leads us on to, what is that? What is Elite? How does it work? What difference does it make? And, what impact does it have onto clubs?
So it's had a huge impact. This was something, so obviously the initial legislation, the GB legislation, came into play for the January 2021 transfer window initially. And then we had a few cycles of that. And I think the Premier League clubs especially, but also the Championship clubs and the FL clubs, thought that it was maybe a bit too restrictive. They weren't able to buy the players that they wanted to buy. And the players that they were buying, they felt were probably a little bit overpriced because of the fact that they almost had to be at a certain level before they could sign them. So we talked about getting an auto pass and being an established international, or playing in a Big Five league, or one of those other Band 2 or Band 3 leagues. If you're playing regularly in those leagues, or you're an international, then everyone already knows about you. Everyone knows you're a good player. So the transfer fee and the wages that you're having to spend on these players is obviously substantial. And I think Premier League clubs, we talked about that freedom of movement that they had under Brexit, where you could actually bring in, and the big academies did this a lot. And I think partially this is a little bit why they don't want to encourage it, but bringing in like 16-year-old players from like other academies, from foreign academies, into their own academy. So you think of a Cesc Fabregas or a Gerard Piqué, who had moved over from Spain at 16, and that happened all the time, just to get them that, like, on the scholarship at that point, and hoping that one of them will make it, rather than having to spend 20 million plus on a foreign player at like a later stage. So the FA came up with this ESC, which stands for Elite Significant Contribution, which I don't think is a particularly helpful title, because it doesn't really tell you what it is. It's a form of wildcard, and that term wildcard was bandied around in rumour before the regulations came out, and I think a lot of people still think it does mean you can sign anybody. That's not the case. There are still criteria, which I'll go through in a second, but it came in summer 2023. And so I say summer, it was May. So it was May 2023, and it was available for the window that was just about to open. So it obviously threw the cat amongst the pigeons, to use a very English euphemism, but hopefully most people understand what I mean. Basically, anything that you'd planned as a recruitment department, yes, you could still kind of do that, because the GB legislation was still there and it was still broadly the same. But this ESC was exciting, because it basically meant that you could now sign players that didn't hit the 15-point threshold, that didn't get an auto pass, but you only had the limited number that you could do it with. So for Premier League and Championship clubs, you get 4 slots in your squad that you can use for ESC players. For League One and League Two, it's 2 slots. So this again comes back to this idea that of different quality levels and not necessarily wanting to encourage those clubs down in League One, League Two to fill their squad with foreign talent. The problem for the Premier League clubs and the Championship clubs is that it's not necessarily for. You also have to give a certain percentage of your minutes that you play during the league and the cup competitions to EQPs, which stands for English Qualified Players. It's another set of initials to remember. But just basically, again, I think this is a move from the governing body to say, look, we will give you these slots, but we also want you to guarantee that you're going to give English players minutes. And it's funny because it's English qualified players, not British. So a club like Newport County, for instance, are the lowest percentage EQP in League Two because they're Welsh and they've got a lot of Welsh players. But it's still not below the level that it would be a problem for. But you see what I mean? Like Leeds, for instance. So Leeds is a relevant example. Leeds obviously going up to the Premier League. So they've still got 4 slots either way. But they only had a very low percentage of EQP. And a lot of the British players are Joe Rodon, Welsh, Ethan Ampadu, Welsh, Dan James, Welsh, even Carl Darlaw, Welsh, or at least qualified for Wales, not actually Welsh. But so what I'm saying is that obviously they're going to struggle for their slots. I mean, it probably won't necessarily matter that much because of how this has panned out. Zooming out a little bit and looking at the impact of this legislation, Premier League clubs haven't actually used it very much. Obviously, the FA don't publish and the clubs don't tend to tell you if they've used GBE or if they've used ESC when they were signing a player. But so this is what I do again, like in private, I don't publish this stuff. But I'm happy if any of your listeners want to contact me and ask the question of who's got slots and who's used slots. But by my calculations, Premier League clubs since that summer have only used 30 slots between them, and by comparison, the Championship have used over 90. So like there's been far more take up in the Championship than there has been in the Premier League, and the reason for that is again comes back to quality of players. Like if you're playing players in the Premier League, you need them to be pretty much the best in the world, and most of those will get GBE already. But it's the clubs like Bournemouth, Aston Villa, Chelsea, Brighton have all used ESC slots, and Brentford have used ESC slots. So these are clubs that I'm sure that many of your listeners will recognise as clubs who do recruitment slightly differently. And another interesting fact about the use of the ESC slots is that 75% of those Premier League players that have come in on ESC have been aged 18, not just 18 to 20, literally 18. So they're using it in the way that they almost lobbied to get it, as in we want to buy young players, unproven talent. But then it's a case of, it's too early to tell whether it's been successful or not, because they're not buying them to play them in the Premier League straight away. And very few of the ESC players have made much of an impact in the Premier League, but some of them went back out on loan to the parent club as part of the deal. Some of them have been out on loan to other areas. Some of them have just been playing PL2 football. So we will see how that works. Whereas in the Championship, the League One, League Two, most of them have been bought to play in their first teams because, this is a good opportunity for Championship clubs to do that. And clubs like Norwich, for instance, used all of their slots last year. In fact, they tried to sign a player in January and didn't have a slot to put him in. So what they did, and this comes back to how you then are talking about these 4 slots, you can convert a player out of those slots, and this is how you can kind of refresh your slots for various transfer windows. The regulations say that as long as there's been at least one transfer window where you've had this player, you can convert them out of that slot by either playing them in your domestic matches for a certain percentage of minutes. In the Premier League, that's 15% for an under-21 player, or 30% if they're over 21. In the Championship, that's 50% regardless of age. League One, it's 60%, and League Two, it's 70%, which is actually a very high percentage of minutes that you have to play. Again, it's available minutes, not just total minutes. So if you are buying these players in a summer transfer window, for instance, and you are playing them a good percentage of minutes, then by the time February rolls around, you can convert those. You're going to basically apply to the FA and say, look, we've played this player a certain percentage of minutes, so we're taking them out of the ESC slots, and then you'll have those slots back available again for the summer, the next summer. So that's kind of almost like best practice, ideal practice. Of course, the issue then comes, as some of the smarter listeners will probably realise, if you've signed 4 foreign players and you've converted all of them, that means that you've used a lot of minutes on those foreign players, which probably means you've got fewer English qualified minutes. So you may not get your 4 slots in the summer the following season. So this is where strategy and how you're using your squad, not even to start going into like whether the coach wants to use them, whether they're going to fit your tactical system, what the form's been like, all of this stuff. So yeah, it's quite a web to weave, really.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think I see it from my side, from sort of like obviously I see players from a financial regulatory point and how it impacts playing time. I think. Do you think that regulations now are having too much influence on the pitch in terms of player selection compared to clubs being able to just play their best players? Do you think there's more sort of nuance to who's being played because of they've got X terms in their contract, so they have to play X many games? If they don't play X many games, there's an additional payout, or you've got all the regulations from your side of you in terms of if they're English player, we need to get them so many minutes. Like, do you think that it's having too much impact, or do we think it's impacting them in the right way? It's a good thing that there's regulations protecting English players to make sure they're getting their minutes. What's your sort of take on the influence the regulations are having onto sort of on-pitch selection?
Yeah, there definitely is conflict between the coaching staff and then the business side of things, because obviously hopefully in a well-run club, you've got this vision and you're probably considering a player trading model of some kind. And so that means that from a business perspective, you've got these assets and you need, to have them playing to be able to have them maintain or improve their status, especially if you've got half an eye on selling them on later. So there's going to be an element of conflict in that way already. Then when you add in the regulations in terms of the actual rules, that is going to have an impact on selection as well. And I think obviously in an ideal world, the coach will want to select the team exactly as he wants it, with the number of minutes just purely based on almost like performance tactics and fitness, really. And I think in the majority of cases, I don't think the regulations have too much of an impact on that. The coaches can only work with the squad that they're given, and in most cases these days, that is more down to director of football and head of recruitment than it is the head coach. Although most models will have the head coach having an influence in recruitment as well. I think it's silly not to, because you do want their buy-in as well. Widening it out slightly to other things that affect this, like if you are a Premier League club and you're buying these young players in and you aren't able to play them in your first team, but you want to convert them out of an ESC slot, then you can do that by sending them on loan to a Championship club or a League One or a League Two. And obviously there is, a good percentage of the transfer dealings that happen in the lower leagues of the EFL is loan deals from higher up, especially from the bigger academies and such like. So this is a route that I think we will see again this summer, is young foreign players being brought in and then being loaned out into one of these lower clubs. And obviously as part of that deal, and you intimated this in your question, as part of those deals, there are certain stipulations of like, we want this player to play a certain percentage of minutes, but really you don't have any control over that as the parent club. You have to have a really strong relationship with your loaning club to be able to guarantee that the player will get that. And it's important for your planning. If you've sent a player out to the Championship and you want them to play 50% of minutes because that gets them out of the ESC slot, and they're only playing 30% of minutes, then you've got a problem. That plan hasn't worked out. So yeah, it's a tough one, because you at the end of the day, you also want to win or need to win. Like fans expect you to win, that coaches obviously want to win. You know, the hierarchy all want to win, but there's different things at play here, and it makes it a very complicated system. And then I just wanted to touch on in terms of my opinion on kind of foreign input into the system and whether that whether it blocks English talent, because obviously that's what part of this is all about in terms of the minutes that you need to give to English qualified players. I think we've seen, you know, the English national team is as strong as it's probably ever been. Like, if you look at our recent results in major competitions, you look at the way that the under 21s and the other unders teams are winning tournaments most summers now. Obviously, not all of them. Spain have pretty much got a stranglehold on most of the major titles at any age group, but they're still doing really well. And when I was growing up, and really probably the same for yourself, and even going back further than that, you know, England teams didn't do this. So we can't really argue that, you know, the influx of foreign talent, whether that be on the pitch or in the academies or whatever, has had a negative impact on the national team as a whole. I just think that the players know that they need to get to a certain standard if they're going to be able to play regularly at the top of the game. And if they don't make it there, then they can drop into the Championship or League One and League Two and then build again from there. And we've seen some players be able to get back to the Premier League after dropping out from the Premier League team as well. So I think the pyramid works, and I think, you know, as long as the players that are coming in are of a high quality, and that's what this system is designed for, then I don't see a massive issue in terms of, you know, English talent. They just have a high bar to try and reach.
Brilliant. No, I think it's really interesting. To sort of head towards wrapping up, because I'm looking at the time. What are the sort of main? I like this to be like actionable and practical for clubs who are listening to this. So, like, what tools and resources and what are available to them? What should they be doing tomorrow in order to enhance our understanding of this, enhance the way they're monitoring and tracking all of this? Like, what are the actionable next steps that football clubs should be taking in order to get a better hold on all these regulations?
Well, obviously, sign up to the GB Expert Hub is the main one. No, but like on a serious note, I'm about to say this because it's my thing, but even as a free subscriber, right? I'm not trying to sell it necessarily as snake oil to anybody. I started with 12 free articles from December 1st to December 12th. That basically broke down GBE, broke down ESC, looked into the different levels, looked into staff. We haven't even touched on that. Like, obviously, there's regulations involving staff coming over, and a lot of clubs have fallen foul of those as well. The women's game as well, that's got a separate GBE system. It doesn't have ESC at all. But like, so what I'm saying is, there's loads of free articles on the hub, which clubs can go to right now and look at and improve their understanding of it. There's certain free podcasts that I've done as well. Obviously, you can just read the regulations on the FA website, which is really useful. But in terms of then, like you say, actionable insights, and you're right, that's what it's all about. And hopefully people will take some of this from this podcast. But you've got to plan your recruitment to make sure that you're not wasting your time on players that don't meet the criteria. Okay, so yes, ESC criteria have widened that out massively. And again, if you want to know exactly, because we didn't have time to go into them in detail, again, just check that out. You can just type the basics of ESC into Google, and it probably will lead you to my article. But those will give you the criteria. But there's no point in scouting players or spending resource in areas that don't allow players to come over and play. And there are tools out there as well that can give you the GBE points of players. Most of them are obviously paid because it's quite a valuable resource, but you can get a couple of free trials on Transfer Room, and Analytics FC will give you those. But also just get in touch with me and I'll tell you how many GBE points that they get. And also, like, if they meet ESC criteria and things like that. That's kind of what I want to do and what I want to try and help clubs with, really. So there's loads of different routes and things that you should be looking at. Again, an article I just did this week was looking specifically at trying to get players into League One and the Championship that were straight GBEs. It's not that easy, but there are certain routes that you can look at from a financial and from a quality perspective that will be good enough and still get the 15 points.
Brilliant. I think firstly, just thank you for your time today. It's been really informative. It's been really clear on how these regulations work. For anyone that's listening to this who would like to network with myself and Andy, go deeper into these regulations, ask your own questions to sort of improve your understanding on this. We'll be doing a live Q&A inside our community. Link will be in the description below. And we really hope to see you all there, because it's not often you get to network with someone who has such a comprehensive understanding on these subjects. And if this is something that can help your football club, or you're someone that wants to work in football, whether you're a football agent, whether maybe you're a manager and want to understand how it's going to impact your sort of player performance and also your recruitment of your background staff, I think it'll be a really, really informative and really valuable session. So I really encourage everyone to use the link below to come join us for that. And yeah, thank you again, Andy. And yeah, it's been great having you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And yeah, any questions that come in, like if you want to submit them before, I'll have time to research them and get some really interesting answers for that. Not that I can't answer things off the top of my head, but sometimes people might have specific questions that they want answers to, so I'll get them into Josh.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.